Hey everyone, thank you for watching. In this video I'm going to show you how to draw the rings of a tree. So grab your pencils and let's get drawing. The first thing you need to understand is that the rings of the tree are really just the outer portion of a tree if it's cut in half or cut in as a cross section. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to draw a circle, which is the equivalent of chopping a tree like that, and we're going to draw the rings that would exist on that tree. So follow along. I'm using an H pencil here. What you want to do is draw a circle similar to what I just did, but be okay with the fact that that circle does not have to be perfect. It could be a bit of an oval, or it could have also some indentation points that kind of move in like that. So there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I might even purposely put a couple in just to make this look a little more realistic. Because in real life, a tree is going to be somewhat of a circle, but not necessarily just that. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay. So I actually purposely want to just vary this up a bit, and I'll just darken this as well. All right. If you're wondering why we're drawing this and what this means, a tree, if this is the center of the cross section, a tree when it's young will start to grow layers out and around, and that's really what the rings of a tree mean. A lot of people count the rings and equate that to the age of the tree. For the most part, you can kind of guess that, but that's not always the case. Counting the rings of a tree doesn't necessarily give you its age. There's a lot of factors that go into that, and I'll explain some of that in this video. But let's just kind of form the drawing here as well. Before we draw the inner part, I would really like to establish the outer part as well. If this is a tree that is anywhere from 20 to 75 years old, you'll definitely have an outer layer of the bark. The outer layer of the bark would typically be something that is a bit jagged in its approach and very, very, kind of sporadic in terms of the look of it. So as you can see right here, I'm really just kind of creating this bark. There are some little spots that kind of do go in, so don't be afraid to kind of draw those parts as well. There's no pattern to those. I'm not actually sure the reason why those spots really kind of move in. I think it's just nature's way of having some variation in terms of that tree and that tree bark. I think in another video what I'll do is I'll draw the outer part of the tree so you can actually see this bark that we just drew, and I'll show you what that looks like from an outer perspective. But I just thought it was important to kind of show you this as well. If we're gonna continue this drawing, you might want to just add in a little bit of shading around this thicker part that we drew, kind of the outline of the tree. So you can do this just like this, because when you do a real cross section, this piece isn't necessarily very fine and very thin. There's actually some thickness to it, and it is representative to kind of show that in this drawing as well. So I'm just going to do that. Are you drawing as well? Are you kind of following along, just watching? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to know your feedback. Since we started doing some tips and hints in our videos, we kind of noticed some more comments about, oh, I didn't know that, or really interesting fact. I think we did one video and we looked up some info, and it said before erasers were around, people used breadcrumbs as erasers, and someone said breadcrumbs, really? So I don't know, hopefully you guys are appreciating the little facts that we're putting together. So I made that a little thicker, and what I'm gonna do is draw the outside, some of the shapes around the bark that exists around the outside. So what I'm doing is really just taking some of the jaggedy parts over here and just creating some kind of realistic indentations that would kind of exist like over here, right? The same would kind of exist inside over here, And I'm just going to repeat this process right around. Okay, so I'm just going to go around. This might take a bit of time. You know what? Why don't I speed this part up? I'll come back to you. I'm just going to repeat this process here. So you can see what I'm doing here is just creating these different areas of realistic dark spots, and it's really just layers of the bark, really. So I think what I'll do is I'll speed this part up. I'll come back to you. It might make for a more efficient video, and I'll come back with more drawing tips as well as more facts about this, the rings of a tree and how to determine different facts about it. So hang with me, I'll be right back. All right, so we're back. I just basically drew some darker spots around the outside, which would be the bark of the tree. And in doing so, I'm just kind of randomly creating some darker spots, nothing specific, nothing in terms of a specific pattern. But in doing so, I really just try to create some realism in terms of the effect, in terms of the fact that a real outer bark, this is the outer bark that I'm drawing here, would really have this. What I would love to do right here is just kind of use my smudge technique and kind of on the outside really carefully just let some of this lead bleed onto the page, because when we're done the drawing, you'll see that that part will actually be a lot darker. So I definitely want that to be darker as well. Okay. In fact, what I could also do is I could grab something like a 7B, and I might also just reinforce some of the darker spots right over here towards the inner part. That's the inner part of the bark. Because like I said, in real life, this part is darker, so you really want that to show in your drawing. Okay. Great. So I really just added that in, and whether now or later, you can kind of re-smudge that in, and you'll see some of that 7B also bleed throughout the page as well. In a good way, right? You want that to be a bit darker. I think over here, it could just be a little bit darker. There we go, that's looking a lot better. So, the next step is you wanna grab a sharp pencil. I've got a sharp H right here. All I have to do is make a little bit of a dot towards the middle of this drawing, and I'm gonna start doing some concentric circles. But what I can tell you about trees as well is that in terms of the lines, like I said, a lot of people think that that's a year. So 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year. That's sort of true, sort of not true. So really what happens is the line represents a growing season, and sometimes in some seasons they're very thin. So for example, if the lines are very close together, there might be some very short seasons or seasons in which the tree didn't grow very much. But in some seasons where there's very, a lot of space between, you actually will have had a stronger season and more tree growth. So the lines do somewhat represent the year, and just keep that in mind that the thinner lines will represent something like a shorter season, and the wider lines is a longer growth season, right? So let's draw our lines around here. In doing so, I'm just gonna kind of go like this. And I think for the most part, you do want to start just a little bit thinner and closer together as the tree was younger. I'm not saying that the tree had a shorter growing season when it was younger, but typically you're going to see some thicker lines towards the outside, just based on the size of the tree as well as the age of the tree as well. So. We're not necessarily drawing a perfect circle over here. Just like we drew the outside of this tree, the tree doesn't necessarily grow in a perfect circle. There's ins and outs and crevices and all kinds of things that the tree experiences. So we're just going to keep repeating this process. It's kind of relaxing to draw this as well. Kind of just going round and round and round. I'm just going to repeat that. Maybe in this portion I'm going to say, hey, this tree had a really nice, strong growing season for several years, so I'm actually going to draw these rings just a little bit wider and a little bit bigger. The trick to drawing these circles as well is, for the most part, you want to match the outer shape of the tree as well. You can't have a tall and wide tree and your circles that you're drawing inside are short and long. So you really have to try to match to the outside of the tree as well. Because these interior lines are actually just representative of what that tree looks like at the moment, which is what I drew first, right? And then, like I said, as you get to the outside, the shape and the thickness of these lines does tend to get quite big. And it's not necessarily because of what I said, which is like, oh, the tree had a really strong growing year and a lot grew. Yeah, that could be true, but also just based on the size of the tree, as trees get a lot bigger, if they grow at an annual rate of whatever percentage, I don't know, certain percentage every year, the percentage of growth in the later years is going to be, will have more growth. So you're actually going to just see a lot more growth in the later years in terms of a like measurable distance, right? So that's kind of what I was trying to describe. Okay. So for the most part, we have, that's it. So we have our lines. It does not have to be perfect by any way, but certainly something that is realistic for the most part. Okay. So the other thing that you might want to do is just add some realistic kind of. First of all, let's switch it up. Grab something like a 7B and just add some indentations over here. This is a great way to just add some realism to the tree, to the cross section, really. I'm just randomly picking spots and creating a bit of a indentation and then a line that goes out. If you ever mess up that line and it doesn't look right, just extend it further. So let's say I wasn't happy with how that looked, I can kind of just continue it and make it look a little more complete. Okay. And these lines that I'm drawing are like this. So I kind of go like this. And then over here, I might want to just continue and that's really what I'm drawing over there, right? So if I'm not happy with how that's looking, you might want to just make it look as uniform as possible. So that's really what I'm doing at this point. So a couple more, let's just get a couple more of these lines in there. Sometimes there's even a couple side by side, just like that over there, and even over here. So I might even get just a bit of a larger one in there too. And I think these lines that sometimes appear just kind of nature's way of just nature kind of getting into the tree or just kind of breaking through some of the cross sections that exist in the outer bark. I think that's all it really is. Okay. The other thing you might want to do is just understand that some of these rings do bring with it the ever slightest, tiniest little bit of shading, but the shading that would exist, you might have to ensure that it stays within a certain ring. So sometimes, for example, this ring might be a little bit darker, but you typically want to stay within that ring. You don't want to necessarily shade a region of the cross section, right? So I might, you know, just kind of go like that and just make sure that your lines are still intact. I guess the point here is that if you're going to use your smudge technique, just carefully use it. I was going to do it at the end, but you could do a little bit now. Very slowly use that smudge technique. You want those lines to stay. They're real, in real life, they're there and they're very fine and they're very visible. So carefully use your smudge technique as well, okay? And the other thing is that it's also realistic to redraw some of these lines and make some of them darker than others. There's sometimes areas in which the lines are darker and even just the tiniest bit thicker. So you can actually do that as well. And that's kind of what I'm doing right here. And just adding another layer of shading down here and just kind of, you know, just making it look as real as possible. So some of these lines you can redraw, and you can also just, you know, so let's look at this area here and say, hey, you know what? These lines should also just be a little bit thicker. I think there's different reasons in nature for that, but let's just say, hey, okay, these lines should be a little thicker. And in doing so, we can kind of, yeah, just in this area, make them thicker. So pick some of these lines that you want that to happen for. And then I would say at this point, go extra carefully with your smudge and follow the circle shape. And follow the circle shape there, okay? Okay, great. So the trick is to smudge without losing the lines. I might have gone just a little too hard there, but that's fine. Anything can be touched up. So yeah, I'm just kind of touching up some of these lines. How's it going for you, by the way? Let us know in the comments. Are you drawing? Are you watching? We love to know. We love to hear from you. So please let us know. The other thing that I want to do is maybe grab my 7B again and just fix up some of the outer part of this, the bark, right? So just kind of getting some of this outer bark just a little bit darker, I think will look a lot better. So I'm just going to go around the outside. Just darken it up. Again, in real life, your outer bark is actually going to be quite dark. I mean, it depends on what tree you're drawing as well, right? Every tree is a little different, very different actually, not just a little bit different. But a typical tree that has an outer bark and an inner bark, the inner with the circles, the inner is typically going to be lighter and the outer part is typically going to be darker. So that's kind of why I'm, you know, just darkening up some of the outer parts over here as well. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You can really just do this like this and just, you know, you can just get some of these darker lines existing as well. So we kind of lost some of the darker lines that I put on earlier. So I might want to go back and just kind of either redraw them or just kind of just make sure that they're visible, right? It's kind of nice to show some of the realism that exists over there. what else can I say? What else can I tell you? So I'm pretty happy with this. I would say that the last thing that you want to do is just make sure that your inner lines, none of them have really kind of disappeared to the point where they're not visible. Because in real life, they are, although fine, they are quite visible. So if any have kind of disappeared just a bit, you might want to just go back and just kind of go over them just a tiny, tiny bit. My hand's been all over this too, so that doesn't really help, but I purposely did do some darker spots in this zone, and I purposely wanted to do that. So there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but just be aware of that if you're going to be doing that as well, right? So just make sure that your lines are visible. I think for the most part, I'm pretty happy with this. Hopefully you are too. Hopefully you're drawing along. Please let us know how it's going for you. We'd love to hear from you, but I would say that's it. This is how you draw the ring or the rings of a tree and the cross section of a tree. So thank you so much for watching and have a great day.